When the first Rage was announced all the way back in 2007, it was somewhat of an event in the gaming community. Here was id Software, the legendary studio behind Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake, developing their first major new IP in well over 10 years. Fans understandably expected, or at least hoped for, some level of genre-defining genius. But the first-person shooter genre just wasn't meant to be redefined. Rage reviewed well, but it ultimately fell short of expectations, was soon forgotten, and seemed destined for obscurity. So when Rage 2 was announced in the spring of 2018, it was, well, puzzling. Nobody asked for this game, and just as odd as its very existence was the fact that Rage 2 looked practically nothing like its predecessor. Plus, id was passing lead development duties to Avalanche Studios, known mostly for third-person action adventures, not first-person shooters. But now, fast forward to the present, and it appears that maybe, just maybe, Bethesda, id, and Avalanche knew what they were doing all along. Based on what we've seen so far, Rage 2 looks fantastic. Of course, we won't know if it's any good until it releases on May 14th, but Bethesda has given us a lot of gory footage and tons of information. So join me as I look at everything we know about Rage 2 and why it's one of my most anticipated games of 2019. Let's get one thing out of the way. Unlike previous titles from id Software, Rage 2 is a decidedly open-world game. Even the original Rage, with its load times and separated areas, didn't provide total freedom. But this go-around, everything is seamlessly connected and choice is the name of the game, starting with the choice to play as either a man or a woman. From there, the world opens up almost immediately. In a 2018 interview with VG247 at QuakeCon, id studio director Tim Willits said of the game, quote, "As soon as you finish the introduction, the door opens and you can go anywhere," end quote. As for how the world unfolds, here's what we know. It's up to you to either follow the main quest or wander around the world if you want to discover additional missions. Completing certain objectives will help upgrade your skill tree, which features 3 distinct categories: combat, engineering, and your superhero-like nano-trait abilities. Other mechanics we know to be in the game include loot, crafting, and fast travel. And you'll be doing a lot of driving because in this particular wasteland, you can get behind the wheel of literally any vehicle you find, but more on that later. Also, if you're wondering whether you need to have played Rage 1 to enjoy Rage 2, Willits has said no. There are some returning characters, but this game's world and story stand alone in a way that will make total sense to anybody who never set foot in the original game. And speaking of the original game, Rage 2 destroys its predecessor when it comes to its visual presentation. According to Willits, the game will run at 60 frames per second on both PC and consoles, but it's the artistic approach that really sets it apart. Replacing Rage 1's perpetually brown palette is a more varied look accentuated by refreshing fluorescent highlights and defined by the world's distinct environments. You'll explore around half a dozen biomes, from fiery red canyons and misty swamps to elevated cities and lush forests, each begging to be explored. But considering that id is known for contained action experiences and has never made such an exploration-driven world, is there any reason to think that they can make it work? Well, yes, but full credit needs to be given to the team at Avalanche Studios, who's taking the lead on development while id takes more of an advisory role. For those who may not know, Avalanche developed the Just Cause games, famous for providing players with unmatched freedom to create mayhem in fun, inventive, and over-the-top ways. Bringing that same sandboxy open-world madness to a lawless post-apocalypse seems only natural. In fact, Avalanche has already done just that with Mad Max, their critically acclaimed and vehicular-focused open-world game from 2015. In other words, these two studios are a perfect fit for the game they're trying to create. One studio does nothing but open-world chaos, and the other specializes in creating world-class first-person shooters. Plus, with id keeping a watchful eye, I wouldn't be surprised if Rage 2 ends up being Avalanche's most polished game yet. That's not to knock their previous efforts, but in that id created the Rage IP, I'd be surprised if they let anything out into the wild that's not incredibly finely tuned, at least when it comes to the first-person combat. But what will that combat look like? Well, let's put it this way. When it comes to shooting and blowing stuff up, Rage 2 rewards experimentation just as much as its world encourages exploration. Let's take a look. Based on everything we've seen so far, Rage 2's sandbox type of gameplay is perhaps best showcased by its combat abilities. In the original Rage, you had a bionic defibrillator built into your body that allowed you to revive after taking too much damage. The defibrillator is back in Rage 2, but the team at Avalanche has expanded on the concept by creating numerous other high-tech powers called nanotrite abilities. Discovered as you complete the story and explore the world, each nanotrite ability provides your character with a permanent combat or traversal upgrade. Since you're the only person left on the planet who can use these upgrades, this effectively makes you a superhero. On their own, each nanotrite ability is powerful enough, but what makes them so exciting is how they can be chained together in creative ways. But before we get into the combos, let's take a look at each ability. First off are two of the more basic abilities in Rage 2, the double jump and the dash. They're pretty much exactly what they sound like, except the double jump also lets you hang in midair for a couple of seconds. Handy if you want to pick off a few enemies hiding behind a wall, or just get a better view of the surrounding area. One of the most destructive abilities, called Slam, lets you jump into the air, then immediately, well, slam into the ground, obliterating anything within a short radius. The higher you get, the harder you strike. Hit an enemy directly and they'll literally explode, while enemies in the near vicinity will get stunned and go flying. Next up is Shatter, and let's be honest, they could have just called this one the Jedi Mind Trick. It's a concussive force of energy that blasts straight from the palm of your hand, knocking enemies back dozens if not hundreds of feet. Simple but effective, especially if there's a cliff right behind your victim. One of the showpieces of Rage 2's nanotrite arsenal is the Vortex Grenade. It's a gravity bomb that sucks in nearby enemies and items like a black hole. After a few moments, the grenade explodes, sending enemies and objects flying into the air. But that's not even the coolest part. Once enemies are airborne, they float for a few seconds for your sniping pleasure. If you need to play defense, Barrier is an ability that does exactly what you'd think it does, and more. You can prop it up to block enemy fire, but it also explodes when enemies come into contact. I imagine you'll be able to set it up at a choke point and watch as your enemies sprint right into their own explosive death. Rounding everything out is an ability called Overdrive. Killing enemies will fill up your Overdrive meter, and when it's good and ready, activating Overdrive causes you to become faster and more powerful in just about every way. It's not all that original, but who's going to argue with the rabid superhuman berserker who can demolish pretty much anything just by looking at it? Exactly. So those are the nanotrite abilities that we know of so far. And this being an id game, I'd be remiss not to mention the numerous, varied, and sometimes over-the-top guns. You've got your assault rifles, shotguns, handguns, and the like, each of which are fully upgradable. Missing, however, are sniper rifles, and that's because the developers want to encourage close-quartered combat as much as possible. One of the more interesting guns you will have is the Grav dart launcher, which lets you fire darts into an enemy or object, then propel those darts, along with said enemy or object, into a target of your choice. Now that sounds like fun. Also worth noting is that making its return from Rage 1 is the wing stick. If you're unfamiliar, the wing stick is a cross between a boomerang and a machete that locks onto your enemies from a distance and shreds their face right off their skull. Best of all, once upgraded, it can hone in on enemies even from around corners. Okay, so remember how I said these abilities and weapons can be comboed together? Some combos are obvious, like using double jump to get some extra height, which will give your slam ability some extra strength. But others require a little more creativity. Maybe you set up a barrier behind an enemy, then use Shatter to shove him straight through its destructive force field. Or use Grav darts to shove him through. Either way, it's certain death. Another fun idea is to use a Vortex Grenade to create a floating ball made up of every nearby enemy and item, then toss in a regular grenade and watch it get sucked in like magic. These are just a few of the combinations at your disposal, and the developers hope you discover plenty more. In an interview at E3 in 2018, Magnus Nedfors, game director on Rage 2 at Avalanche Studios, said that it's important for Avalanche to, quote, provide tools for the player to just play with the game. He went even further, saying, "I'm almost most impressed with our games when I watch other people play the game and they do shit that I didn't even think of as a game creator." End quote. Needless to say, it looks like there will be plenty of ways to deal death in Rage 2, but who exactly will you be killing, crushing, and blowing to smithereens? Well, let's meet the bad guys. The enemies of Rage 2 are represented by 5 different factions. Most of the enemies we've seen so far in gameplay footage and trailers are members of the Goon Squad. Outfitted like a bunch of apocalyptic punk rockers, they're a dangerous bunch because, well, they just don't care about anything. With no thought-out scheme to take over the world, they're just there to blow everything up. Other factions include a group of hedonistic hooligans called the Riverhogs who live in the swamps and specialize in building some of the baddest combat vehicles around. Then there are the Immortal Shrouded, a sect of highly trained assassins who've made excellent use of the world's available technology. Get into a shootout with them and you'll have to contend with soldiers wearing cloaking armor, and if you're chasing any of their teched out buggies, expect to weave in and out of their electrified tripwires. Between these 3 factions alone, it's clear that your tactics must vary depending on who you're fighting and where you're fighting them. Of course, mutants are also a big part of the Rage universe, and in Rage 2, a large population has coalesced to form one group called the Abaddon. All you need to know is they're disgusting, vicious, and they sacrifice humans to satisfy the deity they worship. So yeah, have fun. And if you get the urge to fight mutants on TV, yes, I said on TV, Mutant Bash TV is making its triumphant return from Rage 1. For the uninitiated, it's a game show that pits you against wave after wave of mutants on live TV. Welcome to the future. And last, but certainly not least, the Authority returns. Featured in Rage 1 as your main opposition, the Authority is a brutal regime that aims to take over the now destroyed Earth. To keep their soldiers in line, there's nothing the Authority won't deem necessary, including unthinkable forms of human experimentation, which if you didn't know is the source of the mutants in the Rage universe. Still in control of the Authority is the maniacal Martin Cross, but it's not exactly clear if he's the story's main villain or if Rage 2 features someone even more diabolical. My bet is on the latter. As I alluded to before, each of these factions provides diversity not only in terms of boots-on-the-ground gunplay, but also in terms of the vehicular combat. Each faction has different vehicles to contend with, but thankfully, so do you. And with that in mind, let's take a look at all the ways vehicles factor into the gameplay. As was made plainly clear in one of the official gameplay trailers, if you see a vehicle in this game, you can drive it. We don't know exactly how many vehicle types there will be, but we do know it's more than a dozen at the very least. First and foremost is the Phoenix. As far as we know, this is the car you start the game with. It's a heavily armored buggy that looks like it was built to explore the surface of Mars. The impressions so far are that this is one of the most sturdy and most responsive vehicles in the game. If you want to change it up though, there are all sorts of cars, trucks, and more, each featuring, one would think, distinct advantages and disadvantages. From motorcycles to a monster truck to tanks, you can even commandeer a boat, though we haven't seen what that looks like. And if you're not scared of heights, there's a flying vehicle called the Gyrocopter, which looks more or less like a drone with a cockpit. And these vehicles stay with you throughout the game. Nedfurs himself has confirmed that you'll have at least one garage to store your fleet, and your garage will double as your chop shop. So if you want to bolt a rocket launcher to the top of your ride, add some shields, or outfit your engine with a performance boost, go right ahead. And building up your vehicular arsenal will be important because one of Rage 2's more challenging objectives will be to take down large enemy convoys. If you played Avalanche's Mad Max back in 2015, this should look somewhat familiar. The convoys we've seen so far feature a leader, usually driving some massive fortress on wheels, surrounded by battle buggies, motorcycles, and other more nimble rides. It's not clear what you'll gain by taking down convoys, but if the controls and vehicular combat mechanics are tight, this could be one of the most epic and fun things to do in this crazy and hectic world. And if you're hunting smaller game, say enemies that happen to be on foot, you can even use your vehicle itself as a weapon. Similar to the Batmobile in Arkham Knight, this game features an eject feature that allows you to safely shoot into the sky. But unlike Arkham Knight, you can watch as your car plows into any unfortunate bad guys who happen to be in the way. Sign me up. But the driving isn't limited to just exploring the world and taking down its inhabitants. There are also dedicated racing events where your main goal is to simply cross the finish line first. Get the checkered flag, and at least one of the potential rewards will be to win certain vehicles. Obviously, the vehicular gameplay in Rage 2 has enormous potential, but it also raises one of the few concerns that seems to pop up regularly with those who have played preliminary builds of the game. While the on-foot combat seems razor sharp, the vehicles have been described as weightless and tough to control. Given Avalanche's experience in developing Mad Max, not to mention all the vehicular options in the Just Cause games, one would hope they'll tune this aspect of Rage 2 by the time it launches. If they do, it could be one of the most unique aspects of the entire game, especially when it comes to first-person, open-world shooters. Literally, as I was editing this video, Bethesda released a trailer that I think shows what sort of outrageous tone they're trying to set with Rage 2. The game will feature a cheat of some kind that will activate play-by-play commentary by none other than Tim Kitzrow, the legendary voice behind the hit 90s arcade game NBA Jam. If that means nothing to you, just take a listen.
He's on fire! Let's rage! Whoa, baby! Pow pow puppy chow from downtown! See ya! Wing it! You just sliced her head right off!
Just make the crowd go!
Fly like an eagle! Bam! Tang tang boomerang! Whoop! There it is! Loud noises! Oh, slam! Should've had your vitamins.
How friggin' cool is that? The downside is that this is being marketed as a pre-order bonus, but hopefully the cheat will eventually become available to everyone. In any case, it's obviously not a core gameplay mechanic, and the one-liners will probably get pretty old pretty fast, but this just shows the type of fun that Avalanche and id are having with Rage 2. I think when developers put the right amount of love into their game without taking things too seriously, the results can be spectacular, and that's exactly what I'm hoping for with Rage 2. So there you have it. After all my research, I have to say Rage 2 is looking pretty dang good. But as with any preview, I encourage everyone to wait until the game releases and the reviews are out before spending your hard-earned cash. If you want to learn more, you can find all the articles and videos I used to research this video in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down, and until soon, we'll see you next time.
Home to the mountain.